So everything starts with the sales line, okay? Growth is the lifeblood of all organizations. People ask me all the time, well, Bernie, how much should my sales growth be? What, is it a dartboard, a dart you throw at the dartboard? Is it a number that the CEO has in his head? What kind of drives that number? What I tell people is a good rule of thumb is 4 times CPI. So if the CPI is growing at 2%, you should be looking at a good, healthy organization would have their sales line growing at 8%, okay? If it's growing at 2.5, you're 10. If it's growing at 3, you're 12. Generally, if you take the rule of 72 and you divide that percentage into 72, the result is going to tell you how many years it would take you to double. Example is, if I have a 15% growth rate, I divide that into 72, I'm going to get a number around 5. So every 5 years, our business would double. If you're a $100 million business, in 5 years, you'd be a $200 million business. Generally, rules of thumb around that help us to kind of understand what kind of target we should be setting, okay? You want to work with your sales leadership team and kind of determine an appropriate forecast, okay? Again, my goal is to kind of push that team to 4 times CPI, so I almost all the time start out with 8 to 10% growth. They need something to kind of look for, but you don't need something that has no justification. If the accounting guy said it's going to be 10% and they're telling me it's going to be minus 10, you need to get some realism in there, okay? So start with a goal that you're setting out there. Review the history, okay? You want to have some reasonableness around your forecast. So look at customers that you sold over the last year, over the last 2 years, over the last 3 years. Look at the history as much as possible. I want as much data, and you should want as much data in your budget process around customers, items, prices that we're going to charge customers, quantities that they're expected to buy, the month or the period that they're expected to buy those in, whether you do this forecast by this budget by quarter, or you do it by month, or you do it by accounting period. Some of us use the 4-4-5 accounting philosophy, so then you would have 12 periods, okay? So think about that in your sales forecasting process and working with your sales team and how you're gathering that information and how you're laying out that information. It's very useful when we start to do comparisons to budget to have the information in this format. I can determine whether it's a timing issue. Well, we expected to sell those in March and we're really selling them in April. Not something to be overly concerned about in the reality of the real world. But if we expected to sell them in January and we're not selling them to June, now I have carrying costs, now I have inventory issues, now I have service issues, now I have certain different things that I've spent, okay? So you want to think about some of those things. Quantities, prices, items. That data helps us with doing comparisons when we look at sales versus actual, and we can figure out, is it a pricing problem? Did we have to give customers a 10% price discount in order to get the volume later in the season? Okay, well that would be a price issue, not a item issue or quantity issue, okay? Is it the quantities that we forecasted wrong? All of this process of doing the budget and then creating a way to measure it during the real actual year creates the data that you need to do a better budget next year. So you want to think about as much of this data as you can gather in the budget process, then you set up systems to report on that, then you set up comparisons, next year's budget gets better, you repeat the cycle 3, 4, 5 years in a row, you get a really good predictability of where you're going in the future, and you got a good grasp on the cash and different things you need based upon the real data. Okay, so as much detail as you can get. You want to create a calendar in this process, okay? I want to have a calendar of due dates. So I'm meeting with the salespeople and I'm kind of getting the sales forecast.